Royal Guard Force's car door open, after Charlotte's face pressed against tinted window. She had never been a stranger to the idea of fame or luxury, but this was different. Today, she was in the heart of it all, surrounded by the royal family, public events, and crowds of people who were all focused on one thing, the royal procession that was about to begin. As the car she was in slowly rolled through the cobbled streets, she could feel the weight of the moment. The black luxury car with tinted windows wasn't just any ordinary car. It was a vehicle that had transported many notable figures, and today it was transporting her, Charlotte. She wasn't royalty by blood, but by invitation. She had been invited to this royal event due to her connections, and the honor of being in such a setting was not lost on her. The car's plush interior contrasted sharply with the bustle of the city streets outside. Inside the vehicle, Charlotte tried to steady her nerves. She had spent the last hour getting ready, meticulously choosing the perfect dress that would make her stand out but not overshadow anyone. The nerves she had felt earlier in the day were still lingering, but as the car approached the venue, the excitement of the event began to wash over her. She knew she was about to witness something extraordinary. The royal family's arrival was always a spectacle, and she was about to be part of it. But as the car came to a stop at a light, her thoughts drifted. Outside, the world was moving in a blur of colors, people waving flags, their faces filled with anticipation. The cheers and the sound of marching bands filled the air, signaling the beginning of the day's events. Charlotte's curiosity got the best of her. She was so close to it all, but the tinted windows of the car blocked her view. She pressed her face against the window, eager to catch a glimpse of the excitement. Her breath fogged up the glass for a brief second, and she quickly wiped it away with her sleeve. She leaned closer, watching the people gathered along the sidewalk, their faces full of wonder as they caught sight of the royal family's procession. The atmosphere was electric. It was a sight to behold, a grand event that had drawn thousands to the streets, and here she was, inside the car, only a few feet away from all the action. As Charlotte's face pressed against the glass, her mind wandered to the significance of this moment. She had always admired the royals from a distance, reading about their lives in newspapers or watching documentaries about their history. But to be here, in the midst of it, felt like something out of a dream. She could see the people on the streets cheering, waving banners, and it felt like the world was watching. The royal family was a symbol of tradition, of something that transcended time, and she had been invited to witness it firsthand. Charlotte's eyes searched the crowd, trying to catch a glimpse of someone familiar, perhaps a member of the royal family she had seen on television. She was not expecting to see them up close, of course, but it was exciting nonetheless to be so near. There were other dignitaries, too, walking along the streets, their faces calm but radiating an aura of power and respect. The event was important, and Charlotte could feel the weight of that importance even from within the comfort of her car. But then something unusual caught her eye. A figure near the edge of the crowd seemed to be standing out. He was tall, with a strong posture that spoke of authority. Charlotte instinctively watched him, drawn by his energy. He wasn't just another person in the crowd. There was something about him, a quiet confidence that made her feel like he was somehow connected to the event, even if he wasn't obviously part of the royal entourage. She couldn't be sure, but she had an unsettling feeling that this person was someone important. Before she could think much about it, a sudden movement caught her attention. The car had stopped at a security checkpoint, and a guard quickly approached the vehicle. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes instinctively went to the window again, hoping to catch more of the spectacle outside. But before she could take another breath, the guard came closer. The tinted windows and the thick glass of the car shielded her from the direct sunlight, but she could still sense the guard's presence. There was a change in the air, a shift that made her feel like she was no longer just a spectator to the event. She leaned back slightly, trying to get more comfortable in her seat. Her mind raced for a moment, trying to process the unexpected intrusion. The security here was tight, something she had already expected. But Charlotte didn't expect her simple curiosity about the events outside to cause any disturbance. She wasn't trying to do anything wrong, she was just trying to experience the moment. But as the car continued to wait, the guard's eyes locked onto hers. Charlotte hadn't realized it at first, but now, as the seconds passed, she began to sense a shift. There was something about the way the guard was looking at her, as if she had done something wrong. The discomfort in the air grew thick, and Charlotte felt the weight of his gaze more sharply now. She slowly turned her attention from the window and glanced at the other guards. They had noticed too, but none of them seemed to make a move to stop the one who had approached her car. Charlotte's curiosity mixed with the tension in the air. She knew the event was a high-profile one, with security running at full capacity. Still, she hadn't expected her innocent action, pressing her face against the window, to cause such a reaction. Her heart began to race as the guard took another step closer. It was almost as if he had been waiting for an excuse, a reason to approach the car. Charlotte couldn't help but feel that the situation was slowly slipping out of her control. She had only wanted to experience the event, to feel connected to the people on the streets, but now she was caught in a web of security, protocol, and misunderstanding. Before Charlotte could process what was happening, the guard's hand was on the car door. It was a movement so swift, so sudden that Charlotte didn't have time to react. She blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. He didn't say anything, but his actions spoke volumes. The door was about to be opened, and Charlotte, still sitting in the car, felt the full impact of her innocent curiosity. Her face was still pressed to the glass, but now she could hear her heart pounding in her ears. The door handle rattled slightly as the guard tried to force it open. Charlotte, unsure of what was going on, instinctively pulled back, her mind reeling. She looked up to see the guard standing there, his eyes unblinking, focused on her. What was happening? Why was he trying to open the door? The situation felt surreal, like something out of a dream. She couldn't understand what she had done wrong. She wasn't causing any harm. She had only been trying to get a glimpse of the event outside. But now there was a feeling in the air that she couldn't shake, a sense of being watched, of being judged, for something she hadn't even realized could be an issue. Charlotte took a deep breath and sat up straighter, unsure of what to do next. The tension in the car was palpable. The once exhilarating atmosphere of the event had been replaced by confusion and unease. Charlotte was no longer simply a spectator. She was now the focus of attention, and the reality of the situation was beginning to settle in. She was caught between wanting to defend her innocence and the growing sense that she had somehow become a problem, despite her best intentions. Charlotte's heart was still racing as she tried to process what was happening. The moment felt surreal, as though everything she had planned for the day was slipping away, replaced by a sense of confusion and discomfort. The car was meant to be her little escape from the crowds outside, a place where she could enjoy the spectacle of the royal event in peace. But now, the tension had reached a level that she had never expected. The guard's hand on the door handle was the tipping point. He wasn't speaking, but his presence felt almost overwhelming. For a brief second, Charlotte thought about just rolling down the window and speaking to him, explaining that she meant no harm. But the look in the guard's eyes made her hesitate. There was something cold, something sharp in his gaze that made her think twice. She had never been in a situation like this before. She was used to being in control, used to being able to navigate social interactions with ease, but this was different. The authority in the guard's stance, the rigidity of his movements, made it clear that he wasn't there to have a conversation. Her fingers tightened around the seat belt. The silence between them felt thick, almost suffocating. The car's air conditioning hummed quietly, and she could hear the distant sounds of the crowd, their cheers growing louder as the royal procession got closer. Charlotte, however, was no longer part of the excitement. She felt like she was in a different world now, one where the rules were no longer clear. The guard's eyes never wavered. Charlotte could feel the weight of his stare, but she didn't know how to react. She had been in tight situations before, disagreements, awkward conversations, even moments where she had to assert herself in uncomfortable environments. But none of those experiences had prepared her for this. It was as if the moment had shifted from one of innocent curiosity to one of suspicion and doubt. As the seconds passed, Charlotte realized that she couldn't stay silent forever. She had to say something, even if it was just to break the tension. Taking a deep breath, she shifted slightly in her seat, leaning towards the window. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice a little shaky. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was just trying to see what was happening outside." Her words hung in the air, but the guard didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge that she had spoken. Instead, he seemed to grow more focused, his hand still gripping the door handle with an almost mechanical precision. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. What was he going to do? Was he going to force the door open and drag her out? The thought made her feel a chill run through her body. She had never been one to panic, but in that moment she felt the creeping sense of helplessness. She had done nothing wrong, she hadn't broken any rules. She had only wanted to be part of something, to see the royal procession just like everyone else. And yet, here she was, sitting in the back of a car, being scrutinized as if she had done something wrong. She glanced out the window again, trying to regain some sense of control. The crowd outside was still cheering, their faces full of excitement, but now they seemed distant, like a world apart. She longed to be out there with them, to be part of the action. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the world outside was not as welcoming as she had imagined. It was a world of expectations, of rules, and of security measures she had never considered. The guard's posture remained unchanged. He was tall, his uniform immaculate, and his face expressionless, as though he had seen countless situations like this before. Charlotte's stomach twisted as she wondered if this was just another routine check for him. To him, she was just another person in the car, someone to be dealt with, someone whose curiosity had crossed a line. For a brief moment, Charlotte wondered if she should apologize again, if maybe that would ease the situation. But something told her that apologies wouldn't make a difference here. She wasn't dealing with someone who cared about explanations. She was dealing with someone who followed orders, someone who saw the world in a way that didn't leave room for the small mistakes of a curious person. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out of the situation. Could she just open the door and get out? But the guard's position made that impossible. He stood there like a silent barrier, blocking her from any escape, both physical and mental. The discomfort grew with each passing second. She was trapped, not physically but mentally. Charlotte shifted in her seat again, her hands clasping each other in her lap. She felt small in that moment, as though she had lost the ability to navigate the world around her. The guard seemed to tower over her, his every movement precise, deliberate, and without the hint of compassion. She could feel her breathing becoming shallow as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the guard's hand moved away from the door handle. Charlotte blinked, unsure of what had just happened. Was it over? Had he decided not to open the door after all? Her eyes darted to the other guards, who were still standing at a distance, observing but not intervening. They were waiting for something. Charlotte couldn't be sure, but she sensed that they were waiting for the guard's decision, for his signal to either continue with whatever he was doing or to step back. Her thoughts were interrupted as the guard turned his attention to the driver, his face still unreadable. Charlotte watched in silence, her heart still racing. What was going on? Had the situation changed in a split second? It felt like it had. But the more she tried to understand it, the less clear it became. The car remained still, the engine quietly idling. Outside, the noise of the crowd had reached a peak, and Charlotte could hear the sounds of footsteps approaching, the soft murmur of voices, and the rustle of clothing in the wind. But inside the car, the air was thick with tension. Charlotte didn't know how to feel. The situation was awkward, uncomfortable, and a little scary. She didn't know if it was over or if something more would happen. The guard turned back toward her briefly, his eyes briefly meeting hers. It was a look that seemed to say nothing but everything at the same time. The moment felt loaded with meaning, but Charlotte couldn't decipher it. She just sat there, trying to breathe evenly, trying to ignore the rush of panic threatening to rise in her chest. It was then that the driver spoke, his voice a calm contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in Charlotte's head. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. The guard looked at the driver for a moment before nodding once, a brief acknowledgement. The silence stretched again, but this time it didn't feel as suffocating. The guard's posture seemed to loosen just a little, his military-like stance relaxing, even if only slightly. But Charlotte didn't feel any less on edge. The tension hadn't fully lifted. She still didn't understand what had happened or why she had been made to feel like a criminal for something as simple as pressing her face against a window. But for the first time since the incident started, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the situation was about to be resolved. But whether or not she could escape this feeling of unease, she wasn't sure. Charlotte felt the weight of the silence hanging in the car like a thick fog. It had been a few moments since the guard had turned away, but the discomfort had not lifted. Instead, it had settled deeper into her chest, making it harder to breathe as her thoughts swirled with questions she couldn't answer. What had just happened? Why had the situation escalated so quickly over such a small action? She had only pressed her face to the window, trying to see the royal procession that was unfolding just outside. But now, everything had changed. She felt like she had become part of a story she never wanted to be in. The car was still parked in the same spot, its engine humming softly, blending with the distant sounds of the excited crowd outside. Charlotte could hear the rustle of people's footsteps and the occasional cheer, but it felt far away now, like the energy outside was in a different world. Inside, the air was thick with tension, and it felt like every second stretched on longer than the last. She wasn't sure how much time had passed since the guard had moved away from the door. It felt like minutes, maybe even longer. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. She had never been one to shy away from conflict or uncomfortable situations. She was used to handling herself with confidence, navigating tough moments with grace. But this felt different. She was in a world that wasn't hers, surrounded by people who followed strict rules and regulations. And now she was trapped in the middle of it, caught between her own confusion and the growing realization that she had made a mistake, though she had never intended to. The guard's behavior was still fresh in her mind. His face had been stern, unreadable, like a mask hiding any sign of emotion. The way he had approached the car so quickly, the force with which he had tried to open the door, it all felt like something out of a movie. But there was nothing cinematic about it. It was real and it was happening to her. She had no idea why he had reacted the way he had, but his silence, his lack of explanation, made it all the more unsettling. She had no way of knowing if he was just following protocol or if something else had caused him to act so forcefully. All she knew was that she hadn't done anything to deserve it. She glanced out the window again, trying to find something familiar, something that could ground her in the moment. The world outside seemed so far away now. The cheers of the crowd, the waving of flags, it all felt like a distant memory. Her focus returned to the guard. He had moved away from the door but had not left the vicinity. He stood a few feet away, still watching her. There was no warmth in his gaze, just a cold detachment, as if he had already made up his mind about her. But what had he decided? What was it about her simple curiosity, that had triggered such a strong reaction? The tension continued to hang in the air, suffocating her. She didn't know what to do next. Should she speak up again? Should she try to explain herself? Or should she sit in silence and hope that this awkward moment would just pass on its own? Charlotte wasn't sure which option was better. She wasn't used to feeling this small, this powerless. The urge to speak up was strong, but she didn't know if it would help. The guard hadn't responded to her words before, so why would he now? She shifted uneasily in her seat, her mind spinning with conflicting thoughts. The other guards, standing at a distance, had continued to observe the scene. They seemed calm, detached from the situation, as though nothing unusual had happened. But Charlotte knew better. Something had changed, and it wasn't just in the way she was looking at the world. She had been made aware of something she hadn't noticed before, the distance between her and the world outside. This world of rules, of expectations, of order, it wasn't hers. It never had been. Finally, the silence broke when the driver spoke up again, his voice cutting through the tension. "Everything okay back there?" he asked, his tone neutral but still carrying a hint of concern. Charlotte looked at him through the rearview mirror, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Could everything be okay? Was this really okay? The guard didn't say anything, but he turned his gaze to the driver, locking eyes for a moment. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest. What would happen next? Would the guard finally say something? Would he continue to treat her like some kind of intruder, or would the situation dissolve with a few words? It felt like the car was a pressure cooker, the heat rising with every second that passed. Charlotte's hands gripped the edge of the seat, her palms sweating. She wasn't used to feeling so trapped, so exposed. It was supposed to be a simple moment, just a quick look outside, a small action of curiosity. But now it was turning into something much bigger than that. The guard, after what seemed like an eternity, finally stepped back, signaling to the other officers. Charlotte exhaled slowly, relieved, but the relief was short-lived. She didn't know what had just happened, but the tension in the car hadn't fully lifted. The guard had stepped away from the door, but he hadn't apologized, hadn't acknowledged the misunderstanding. It was as if everything had been decided in that one cold, silent moment. The car began to move again, slowly, as the driver pressed the accelerator. Charlotte looked out the window once more, her gaze drawn to the crowd, but the faces no longer seemed as welcoming. The event was still unfolding outside, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something, that she had somehow been excluded from it. The people on the streets, the royal procession, it all felt distant now, as though she was no longer part of the excitement. The guard's reaction had made sure of that. As the car continued down the street, Charlotte's mind remained in a whirl of thoughts. She wasn't sure what to do with herself, how to process what had just happened. She had been so focused on the event outside, on trying to be part of something bigger, that she hadn't realized the rules of the world she was in. She hadn't understood that sometimes, even the smallest actions could draw unwanted attention. And once that attention was on her, it was hard to shake it off. The guard had treated her like a problem to be dealt with, not a person to be understood. Her fingers brushed against her cheek, where a faint trace of her breath had left a mark on the window. It felt like a symbol of the moment, something that had started so innocently, so quietly, but had turned into something more complicated. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, wishing she could erase the tension, the discomfort, the uncertainty that had settled into her bones. But she knew she couldn't. This moment, this misunderstanding, would stick with her, lingering in her mind long after the event had passed. She had been a spectator, hoping for a glimpse of something grand, something royal. But what she had found instead was a lesson in the complexities of power, of security, and of how easily one small action could shift the balance of everything. The world outside still had its cheer and excitement, but Charlotte felt disconnected from it now, as though the wall between her and the people around her had grown just a little bit higher. Charlotte could feel her heart still racing as the car slowly continued its path through the city streets. The events of the last few moments played over and over in her mind, each repetition bringing a new wave of confusion and frustration. She had hoped to simply enjoy the royal procession, to feel connected to the energy outside the car, but now that moment felt so far away. She had been part of something, but not in the way she had imagined. Instead of witnessing something grand, she had become part of a miscommunication, a misunderstanding that had escalated into something much more uncomfortable than she had ever expected. As the car continued its slow journey, Charlotte tried to regain some composure. She couldn't stop thinking about the guard, his stern expression, the way he had approached the car with such force, his refusal to listen to her words. It was as if her simple curiosity had become a threat. She wasn't sure what she had done wrong, but she knew she hadn't meant any harm. She had just wanted to see the event, to feel the excitement of the crowd, to be part of something bigger. But now all she could think about was how small and insignificant she had felt in that moment. The car turned a corner, and Charlotte's gaze wandered back to the crowd. She could see them now, the people lined up along the streets, waving flags, cheering, and taking pictures. The air was full of excitement, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she could just get out of the car and join them. But then the memory of the guard's actions came flooding back, and she quickly shook the thought from her mind. It was no longer about being part of the celebration. The event had lost its magic for her, replaced by the lingering tension that refused to leave her. She glanced out the window again, but this time she couldn't enjoy the view as she had before. The crowd seemed distant, separated by a line she couldn't cross. It wasn't just the physical barrier of the car window that kept her apart from them. It was something deeper, something more intangible. It was the feeling of being watched, judged, and misunderstood. The thought made her stomach twist in discomfort. She had never been the type to shy away from attention, but this was different. This wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. She had felt it once before when she was younger, like everyone was looking at her, waiting for her to make a mistake, ready to point it out the moment she did. The car took another turn, and Charlotte noticed that the buildings outside were becoming more familiar. They were getting closer to the venue where the royal event was taking place. The excitement of the crowd had begun to fade in her mind, replaced by a growing sense of self-awareness. She didn't want to be part of the crowd anymore, not after everything that had just happened. It felt like the world was moving on without her, and she was stuck in this strange, uncomfortable place, unable to go forward. The driver didn't speak, and Charlotte didn't know what to say. There was nothing she could say that would change what had just happened. The guard's actions had been a silent declaration that she didn't belong, that her curiosity was a problem. She wanted to talk to the driver, to ask if he had seen what had happened, if he understood the discomfort she was feeling. But she didn't. She didn't have the words. She didn't know how to explain the frustration building inside her. She had been an observer, and now, because of one small action, she had been pushed to the side. Her moment of excitement had been crushed, and in its place was a dull ache of embarrassment. The car came to a stop in front of a large building, its stone facade towering over the street. It was the venue for the royal event. Charlotte could hear the sounds of the crowd growing louder as the car idled. She was so close now, but she didn't feel the excitement that had once filled her. It was as if the energy outside was completely separate from her. She could see people taking pictures, their faces lit up with joy, but she couldn't join them. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being left behind. The driver turned to her, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "We're here," he said quietly, but his words felt distant, like they were coming from another world. Charlotte nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She didn't know if she was ready to face the crowd, to walk into that venue after everything that had happened. She didn't know if she could shake off the feeling of being singled out, of being watched like she was somehow doing something wrong. She sat in silence for a few moments, staring out the window, lost in her thoughts. The world outside the car felt like a different place now. It was no longer a place of excitement and celebration. It had become a reminder of her own smallness, her own insignificance. The guard's cold stare, the tension in the air, it all felt like a warning, a reminder that no matter how small her actions were, they could have consequences she didn't expect. Charlotte opened the door, the cool air outside brushing against her face as she stepped out of the car. The crowd was still there, just as lively, just as excited, but she felt detached from it all. She wasn't part of it anymore. She wasn't just a spectator in the audience. She had become the subject of attention, and now she didn't know how to navigate the situation. She could see the royal family members entering the venue, their faces serene and composed, their movements graceful. They didn't seem bothered by anything. They were part of this world of elegance, of ceremony, of tradition. But Charlotte wasn't. She was just a woman who had tried to experience something from the outside, only to find herself caught in a misunderstanding. And as she stood there in the midst of the crowd, she realized something. She didn't belong here, not because she wasn't invited, but because the world outside the car was one she didn't fully understand. It wasn't a place of excitement and openness. It was a world with rules, with boundaries, and those boundaries could be crossed in an instant without warning. She watched the royal procession from a distance, the faces of the dignitaries blending into the crowd. Charlotte was an observer, but she no longer felt the excitement of being in the moment. She was just another person in the sea of faces, watching a world that wasn't hers to participate in. She could hear the cheering, see the cameras flashing, but the energy of the crowd seemed distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The event went on around her, but Charlotte felt like she was no longer part of it. She had been given a glimpse, but it had come at a cost. A small mistake, a small action that had turned everything upside down. And now, as she stood there, caught between the crowd and her own thoughts, she wondered if she would ever truly understand the world she had tried to experience.